If there was ever a game that would be called a love letter to fans, it would be 1993's Rondo of Blood. The game was released for the PC Engine, which, yes, despite the confusing sounding name, it is in fact a console. In the West it was called the TurboGrafx 16, but even with a name as cool as that, it didn't really gain a wide audience and kind of developed a cult following, much like the game we are covering today. The game from the get-go took on a much more bold appearance, taking on a more anime aesthetic, which was a stark departure from the previous games, which had a very western look to them. Now, whether this was for the better or for the worse can be argued, but what cannot be argued is the Rondo of Blood is a mechanical masterpiece. During the duration of this video, I'd like to break down the 4 fundamental pillars that I believe make this game so good, so that you can use them either when you're developing your own game, or if you just want to gain a deeper appreciation of this game on a more fundamental level. So without further ado, let's dive in. The best place to begin dissecting Rondo would be the ground rules it gives you right at the start of stage 1. There is technically a prologue stage where the Grim Reaper shows up, and yes, in these games the Grim Reaper does actually work for Dracula, which I've always found really funny. He shows up, you swing at him a few times, which I guess would be the proper introduction to the whip mechanic, and then he just says, "Next time, it won't be so easy," and he flies away. And trust me, he isn't fucking around when he says that. One thing Castlevania games always do well in my opinion is giving you a nice tight introduction level that really eases you into the mechanics. All the way from the original, they make sure you get a sense of pace and slowly build up the difficulty curve, both within a level and within the general game progression. Anyways, with that aside, you are presented with Richter Belmont, who is a descendant of a long-running family of vampire slayers that are basically the Joestars of the video game world. Well, that is the original 3 parts, before they started taking some more unique villains. Richter seems pretty generic at first. He has his usual whipping and usage of sub-weapons, which you can think of as additional weapons that serve specific purposes. So for example, it can be diagonal attacks like throwing your axe, or even things like stopping time. But after some tinkering, you find out that he has an item crash, which depending on whatever sub-weapon you are holding, can have varying effects. Such as, if you item crash while holding the holy water, it will send droplets of it all over the place, which even the most hardcore shmup players can dodge. After some tinkering, you might even tap the jump button twice and realize Richter can do a backflip, which automatically makes him the coolest Belmont. And after some more, you can even find that he can walk backwards, which is the iconic moonwalk. Now he isn't unique with this, and multiple Belmonts can actually do this. So now would also be a great time to bring up an infamous AVGN quote, which is, in Castlevania, hearts are everything but health. So basically in these games, when you gather hearts, it's not your health that gets replenished, but rather you stock up on ammunition for your sub-weapons. So think of it as each sub-weapon usage has a specific amount of hearts that's needed, and it's generally balanced in a way where a more OP or broken weapon costs more hearts. So for example, think of stopping time, right? Obviously that would cost more hearts. Now one very interesting thing I want to bring up about the item crash in Rondo of Blood is this concept of dynamic iframes. So if you aren't familiar with iframes in general, it's just invincibility frames. So the frames in a game where you're completely invincible. In most games, these are basically fixed, right? You have to learn the timing and all of that stuff. So the really interesting thing in Rondo of Blood is that, for example, you're having trouble with a boss, let's say. Now, you've saved up on a specific sub-weapon, and now you can item crash. Let's say, for example, it's the cross, and this costs 15 hearts to use an item crash. So if you're having trouble with a specific boss, you can technically, like let's say it's pattern specifically, you can technically use the item crash to essentially block out his pattern and get iframes So this is a very interesting mechanic, and I haven't seen a lot of games attempt to give the player something like this. And it adds this whole layer of strategy. Like, should I just use the sub-weapon normally? You know, should I learn his pattern? Just all of this thinking? Or should I give myself these dynamic iframes? But obviously it costs a lot, and is it really worth it? So it makes the player kind of question things and go about their own unique way of playing this game. Now, what is really good at Rondo is none of these mechanics are obsolete, and they all have proper, carefully thought out utilities you observe even within the first stage. There's instances where moonwalking is generally a superior way to go about a segment, or of course the giants you fight instantly showing you how effective the backflip is. The axe subweapon also being given to you isn't a coincidence, as it is very intuitive one to use against the very first boss of the game, because it is a flying wyvern after all, and logically you would try to throw an axe up at it, right, because you can't reach it. It is also important to note that this stage also introduces you to another great aspect of this game that adds a lot of replayability, and that is the branching paths and levels. I won't go too far into this, as that can be its own video, but the idea is that you can branch out in levels, sometimes in obvious ways and sometimes in not so obvious ways. However, because my video is not really like a general review of this game, but more so a focus on, you know, the technical aspects and mechanics of this game, I won't focus too much on that. And for the duration of this video, I'll be going on the so-called upper route of this game, which basically, imagine the branching paths let you go into the castle in different ways, so I'll be focusing on the more traditionally intended one for the duration of this video. Now, for the remaining duration of this segment, I'd like to elaborate on why I don't think Super Castlevania 4 is the best 16-bit Castlevania. And the main reason I want to go on about that is because it directly correlates to the strong fundamental mechanics and just the basics of game design point I'm making in this segment. So in Super Castlevania 4, when the Castlevania series transitioned into the 16-bit era, they gave the protagonist of the game, Simon Belmont, who was also the protagonist of the first game, because imagine Super Castlevania 4 was kind of a remake, a reimagining. It's a bit hard to go into, but just think of it as a remake. And he could whip in all directions, and he had a much more easier to control jump. Think of it like, you know, in other platformers basically, so Mario, Mega Man, all that stuff. Now, the issue is, while all of that sounds good on paper, Castlevania 4 made one very important mistake. They didn't rebalance the actual movement and enemy AI of the enemies that you fight. So what Rondo did right is, they gave you these new tools, but they carefully thought out how these enemies work and how they move. And they didn't really break anything in the game. Whereas what Castlevania 4 did is it made iconic enemies, like just flying enemies, Medusa heads, just so much stuff obsolete, and it made an even more fatal mistake where it made stuff like the sub-weapons you get throughout the game kind of useless, because your whip could just basically do everything, right? One concept I often struggle to explain with games, even though it makes sense in my mind, is the idea of both easier and harder difficulties being balanced in a way where they present a somewhat equal challenge to the players. Now, this can be a little tricky when I explain it like this, because logically you would assume the easy mode would just kind of be the story mode, where you kind of more mindlessly run through the game. Now, I do believe that that should still be the intention. However, one thing I feel a lot of games don't get right is giving the players playing on easy enough of a challenge so that it's almost like quote-unquote true difficulty, but they're never actually in a lot of danger. So it keeps them still engaged despite the difficulty being quite easy. Now, there aren't a lot of games that actually do this, in my opinion. One of the few examples I can actually think of is the Spyro games. But beyond them, not a lot of things come to mind. I feel like the easy difficulty, in general, usually just feels a bit too easy in those games. So what makes Rondo so different? Basically, easy mode isn't something you pick, but rather something you find very early on, right in stage 2. It can be a little hard to stumble upon by yourself, but I think a lot of players find out about it just out of sheer experimentation, or just reading about it somewhere online, as it is just a very commonly recommended thing to do, especially if you read a forum post about struggling or you ask a question somewhere. So here's the first thing I love about this. In this game, unlocking easy mode is just a straight up adventure. You run down this hallway where a damn behemoth is chasing you, you hit a candle, you get a key, then you continue lower on into the level and you find this door. So you unlock this door, hit a dude wearing a cloak, which has a very funny sounding name, and then you rescue this girl named Maria, after which you're presented with some interesting dialogue.
My name's Maria Renard. I heard all about you from the net. I came here to beat some bad men, but I got caught. My family are vampire hunters too, so I guess that means we should be friends now.
Sure, friends. But Maria, you're too young for this. You just let the big hunter here take care of that bad man, okay?
Oh, you don't know anything. I can handle this just fine.
And after you unlock her, you basically have access to the character that probably should have been the one to stop Dracula if we actually sit down and think about it logically. She is basically better than Richter in every aspect when it comes to pure power and movement. She has a Mega Man style slide, double jump, much more control in said jumps than Richter's more heavier traditional feel, a very powerful special attack, the equivalent of stands. But there is a bit of a caveat, and that caveat is her health. Her health is much lower than Richter's, and she can take way less blows. But this is kind of what leads to that perfect difficulty, because sure, you might die from time to time, but she has so many of these tools to help her that it gives players playing the easier mode of this game, which is basically just playing as Maria, enough of a challenge so that they didn't feel the game was completely brain dead, but not to the point of getting agitated or even angry, like you would playing Richter, for example. My main takeaway from this section would be that easy modes are much more interesting when they're organically discovered, instead of just an option you hit in a menu. Now, it doesn't have to be a whole character. Easy mode can also just be an item, and Soulsborne games do this, which is one aspect I often praise, or something like the summon in those games, but I think these are all much more interesting because they create a more fine-tuned experience than just changing around a bunch of variables and adjusting a difficulty. And of course, easy mode should be just hard enough so that the players who are playing on that difficulty are entertained throughout their playthrough. I still remember the first time I fell in love with Rondo of Blood. It was when I reached stage 5 on a late October night with my window open and some chilly wind having just started blowing. The mood was set perfectly to experience this stage. It has left a permanent impression on my mind, from the art direction to the music and just the general atmosphere. Few areas in gaming, especially in action platformers, have left such an impression on me. It usually happens in RPGs and adjacent genres, which is why this one is especially so memorable to me. But what makes it so great from a mechanical perspective? This whole stage is the embodiment of the phrase all killer, no filler. It never has a moment of downtime and constantly challenges the player, either with straight platforming, puzzle-like elements, or just straight up tension. You are thrust into the stage with a flying skull coming instantly towards you, which is sure to give any Castlevania free players PTSD right away. You start moving forward and you are instantly presented with a skeleton pirate holding a long flail. You could jump onto the platform and start hitting him right away, but you could also crouch down on that platform so that you prevent knockback. Now this is a very interesting mechanic that I didn't really bring up until this point of the video, but in Rondo of Blood, unlike the previous Castlevania games, where when you got hit you would be knocked back, that remains in Rondo, but they did an interesting twist where when you're crouched down, the knockback won't ever happen. Rather, you'll just tank some damage. And while we're on this topic, Rondo of Blood has much shorter invincibility frames after you're hit. So you better be ready to start moving and have a plan. It's not that it's super long in the other games, but I feel like Rondo has always had less breathing room. I feel like whether the player starts attacking right away or crouches down is also a very nice reflection of the type of player that they generally are, or just how much they've mastered this stage. But I feel like more cautious players are just more likely to crouch down and start hitting, which was my first instinct because whenever I play the Castlevania games, I've noticed I kind of play in a more immersive, cautious way. But then obviously after you master the game for a while, you just start playing in a much faster way as, you know, the previously cautious way. But it is a bit hard to just rewire my brain in that aspect, I'll be honest. Anyways, you continue on with a few more of these same enemy types that were previously mentioned, and then you reach a purification cross, which I really love how they do this in Rondo of Blood. So in Castlevania games, the purification cross, once you activate it, it makes the enemies disappear. But I feel like in Rondo, they're placed very carefully. So just the moment you do this, it instantly gives you some breathing room. Then the game decides to jump scare you with two more like banded enemies, and that is pretty funny, but it's not too much of a big deal. Lower down you're greeted with a newer enemy type as well, which is the skeleton wielding a bow. He's not too hard, and then you continue on further into a room, which is what I call like the more puzzle elements in this stage, where it's a bunch of rotating weapons and you have to destroy the red sword so that they all evaporate at once. You could go one by one, but this is why I call it like a quote-unquote puzzle element, even though obviously it's nothing like super complicated. Then you enter this room where there's this time 3 skeletons with bows. It ups the ante a bit, but it's nothing too difficult. And that's what I love about Rondo of Blood. It's so fairly designed. When you learn a strategy about how to deal with some event, you can always apply it later on, which is amazing game design. And yes, that does even include the bridge segment in stage 7. Right nearing the tail end, you stumble upon a rifleman, which you can climb up and then dodge his projectile, but then you can also just whip him from below if you want to play it smart, which is another thing this game gives you, like a lot of instances where you can just do something in a smarter way as opposed to just, you know, dodging this pattern and stuff. Right at the end of this stage is your biggest endurance test. Hunchbacks getting dropped all around you as you fight giants trying to hit you with big balls. It is such a perfect embodiment of how this game throws enough at the player but never too much. Contrast this to moments like, say, the infamous Medusa hallway from Castlevania 1, and you can see a very good display of true skill and careful enemy placement. Each hit has to count, be efficient, and calculated. You have to destroy the hunchbacks and birds while evading the giant attacks in a way that has a sense of rhythm that once you master, you truly keep within you forever. There isn't one ideal strategy that will always help you beat this segment or straight up cheese it, but it has a few different scenarios it can branch off to, but the core element of your strategy stays the same. It is also worth mentioning that you can use stuff like the cross or an item crash here, but I am presenting how well this game is thought out even without those. Something you can't say for a lot of platformers, especially Castlevania games that precede it. In those games, some segments and bosses can be downright brutal without a specific sub-weapon. Not here though. My main takeaways from this segment is that your game should never straight up waste your time, but rather it should teach and then test you, it should respect your skill, and that it should be tough but not cheap, which is exactly everything this stage embodies. Now, do you remember when I said that Def wasn't fucking around when he said
Next time, it won't be so easy.
Well, now you're about to see why. I'd argue this boss, among Rondo fans, and just in general Castlevania fans, is straight up iconic. He is possibly the biggest difficulty spike in the game. And you're probably expected to die a lot to this guy. Even the biggest speedrunners shiver and just start straight up praying. Yes, I'm not joking, I've actually seen speedrunners pray when they encounter this guy. Which is honestly kind of hilarious because Richter is just the most religious Belmont out of them all, so they fully immerse themselves into the role of Richter. After an epic climb up these platforms with that ominous boss build-up track, you are greeted with this anime-ass battle introduction that always gets me. And then you have one of the most epic fights that I have ever experienced in the realm of gaming. What makes this boss fight so good is that it plays several key twists on the Grim Reaper we know from the Castlevania games preceding it. Namely that while he still does the iconic scythes, appearing all around you and tracking you, this time you're on top of a ship with the very real threat of just completely falling off, and in this game water kills you. Additionally, this is a free phase boss. The first one is similar to the one you have kind of been used to in the previous games, in that scythes appear all around you and you have to move around and whip. Then he throws these green skulls at you, which the recommended strategy is that you move from one end to the other, but you can moonwalk if you want to be extra cool, I guess. But the part I really want to focus on is phase 3. He comes down and begins resembling his more infamous appearance that we are used to, giving you the sense that now the fight has become real, as if it wasn't hard enough before. This is my favorite segment of the boss because it manages to capture something from a completely different genre, and that's fighting games. The concept I'm talking about is footsies. Now, what are footsies? So basically it's quite a complicated term that can really mean a lot of things to different people. However, the most commonly agreed upon thing that it is supposed to represent is this battle of controlling the space in front of you. And you mostly do this by using good pokes. Now what pokes are think of it as your normal attacks that have relatively fast startups. So not your big damage dealer attacks. So in general, it just represents this overall constant battle of trying to control space. And the main origin of the name is basically because it started with these crouching kicks. So what I did for this video is, because I'm comparing it to fighting games, I actually went out and measured the frame data of the attacks of Richter's normal whip and this one attack that the Grim Reaper likes to do in the third phase, which has this kind of longer startup to visually show you why the boss is so well designed. So first we'll go over Richter's startup. Basically his true startup is 8 frames. Now the reason I say true startup is because his whip is technically a traveling hitbox. Now this is a pretty quick attack and the game is basically telling you that it wants you to be proactive, so with a fast attack the player is encouraged to find and exploit small openings. So in short, during this boss, Richter's whip is basically a tool for interruption. Now what is it interrupting? Well, it's interrupting this slash that the Grim Reaper likes to do in this third phase that I call the footsies phase, and that's this attack he does, which is basically a slash that has a 19 frame startup. Now when I say 19 frames, obviously it sounds, oh, that's a lot more than Richter's, and obviously that is the point, but when you're playing the game, it still is pretty quick. So when you're looking at it like this, it seems pretty easy, and it kind of is. But the thing is, he likes to throw up these scythes as well, so you're focusing on 2 things, not just his startup attack. So it basically creates the rhythm of this fight. The boss's slow, powerful attacks create the fundamental tempo of the encounter, and the player must respect the 19 frame windup, dodge, or position themselves correctly. Now the most common tactic you would do is you whip at the Grim Reaper, and then you walk back a bit because of the slash obviously, and maybe dodge the additional scythes. Then you whip again, and this is that perfect representation of footsies and constant positioning. And then in true fighting game fashion, as a lot of fighting game players like to say, he adapts and he basically jumps and does this spinning attack, so it's kind of like a twist. on what you've just gotten used to with this pattern, and it can be very deadly. And as I said, this boss is extremely hard.
Ass! Fuck!
But then when you finally beat him, it's an extremely satisfying feeling. And that's exactly the takeaway from this segment. The boss, when you beat them, should make you feel satisfied and not like you've sat there and lost your time and been like, oh well, you know, I could have beat him if he didn't have this stupid, obviously broken move. No, you beat him because you truly learned this boss in and out, and he never used anything cheap against you. Now, I won't call out a certain indie game that came out recently that might have a bit of an issue with this, but I think we all know which one I'm talking about. And I hear they patched out some of that, but yeah, I don't really think some of the stuff in that game is that well designed. So throughout this video, I hope I open your eyes a bit more to the more nuanced mechanics of this game. Maybe you've never played it, maybe it's your first time hearing about it, maybe you have played it but you didn't know about some of this stuff, maybe you even know more than me, and I'd like to hear more in the comments, because this game obviously means a lot to me, as you can tell, and the main reason I'm making this video is because I just love some more discussion about this game, and I'd really love for people to just say their opinions about it, maybe stuff they dislike, maybe you think what I said about Castlevania 4 is wrong. I just love to hear all the different opinions about the mechanics, because I just have a very deep appreciation for, in general, the deeper nuances in game design. Also, I would like to thank the YouTuber Stemage a lot. He is a YouTuber, a band member, a musician, just in general, he makes some of the most amazing covers of video games I've heard. And during this video, in the Ghost Ship segment, he allowed me to use a cover of the song that he made, which is one of my favorite covers of all time, and I'll link it in the description, and I really hope you guys go and check it out. He's also been very active in the scene of Metroid metal, which is like a very interesting subgenre, basically at this point, where they take Metroid tracks and they cover them in metal, and he has some absolute bangers with that, and I just really hope you check all of them out. So again, I really thank him for letting me use that track. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video and would like for me to do some more deep dives in games, it doesn't matter whether it's modern or old, I just like all games that have interesting mechanics in them. Drop a like, subscribe, and my biggest appreciation, as I said, would just be discussion in the comments, because that's generally why I make these. And yeah, that would be it. See you guys in the next one.